Well, good morning, and thank you for the invitation. I assume I've just landed in Turkey at the speed of light, and delighted to be here. And thank you so much for the invitation to participate in the conference and to give this talk. So let me ask Honor if you could just switch to the first slide. And yeah, okay. Okay, so as is sort of obvious, this talk is about signal processing and signal processing. What's that? Can I can do that. Do they need my bio?
In the research laboratory of electronics, RLE, and Ford Professor of Engineering at the MIT. He received the SB and SM degrees in 1961 and the SCD degree in 1964, all in electrical engineering from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He's also the recipient of an honorary doctorate from Tel Aviv University. During his career, he has been closely affiliated with MIT Lincoln Lab and the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. His research interests are in the general area of signal processing algorithms, systems, and applications. He's the co-author of the widely used textbooks, Digital Signal Processing, Discrete Time Signal Processing, currently in its third edition, Signals and Systems, and most recently, Signal Systems and Interference, published in 2016. He is also the editor of several advanced books on signal processing. Throughout his career, he has published extensively in research journals and conference proceedings. Dr. Oppenheim is a member of the National Academy of Engineering, a Life Fellow of IEEE, a member of Sigma Xi, and Eta Kappa Nu. He has been a Guggenheim Fellow and a Sackler Fellow. He has received a number of awards for outstanding research, teaching, and mentoring, including IEEE Kilby Medal, the IEEE Education Medal, the IEEE Centennial Award, the IEEE Third Millennium Medal, and the Society Technical Achievement and Senior Awards of the IEEE Society on Acoustics, Speech, and Signal Processing. He is also the recipient of Capers and Marion McDonald Award for Excellence in Mentoring and Advising. In addition, Dr. Oppenheim has received a number of awards at MIT for excellence in teaching and advising, including the Bose Award, the Everett Moore Baker Award, and the EECS Graduate Student Association Advising Award, and the MIT Freshman Advising Creative Activity Award. So we have a superstar in research and teaching join us today. We're very lucky. And without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Professor Oppenheim. The floor is all yours.
Okay, well, thank you once again for the invitation to give this talk virtually. And I assume that you can hear me okay, Honor? Okay. Yeah, and so let me also say thank you to all of you who are at the talk. So if I can see that my first slide is up on the screen, and not surprisingly, this talk is about signal processing and a particular historical perspective on signal processing. Let me say, first of all, that as everybody well realizes, the history of signal processing goes back, well, forever. Basically, there have always been signals, obviously, and they have always needed processing of some type. But much more specifically, what I'm focusing on in this talk is what is referred to as digital signal processing. Digital signal processing being the use of digital computation to implement signal processing. And so the history for DSP, kind of from my perspective, and a lot of this talk is basically my perspective on digital signal processing, really began in the late 50s and into the 60s. And don't know how many of you recognize the person in this slide, but that's not me. That is Elvis Presley. And around the time that Elvis Presley was in his heyday is when you could say signal processing by computer or using digital computers had its origin. Now, what kind of triggered the use of computers for signal processing was that in that era, there were a number of sort of general purpose computers that were fast enough and capable enough to do offline processing of very large signal sets, and also could be used for offline simulation of analog systems. And so some of those computers, many of which were built for military purposes, were experimented with to do various kinds of offline processing. And it really wasn't until the late 70s or mid 70s that that embedded processors for doing signal processing really came into vogue. So back in the 50s and 60s, if we kind of look at the technology and in particular the technology that I was the most familiar with, which was the technology at MIT, there was the Whirlwind computer. And the Whirlwind computer was built at MIT for the Navy for various military purposes. And then shortly following that was what was labeled as the TX0, because that stood for experimental transistorization of Whirlwind. And then following that was the TX2, which was an upgrade to the TX0 and was built at MIT Lincoln Laboratory. So the technology of Whirlwind looked something like this. Those were vacuum tubes. Whirlwind was built with vacuum tubes, as you can see on the slide, 5,000 vacuum tubes. As you can imagine, it was fairly common for at least one vacuum tube to go every several hours, and somebody was always running around replacing them. And then with Whirlwind, the memory that was used was called ferrite core memory, and so this is a bit plane from the Whirlwind memory, and each of the little dots that you see is a ferrite core, and each ferrite core represented one bit. And that was very sophisticated technology at the time. So if I just go back to Whirlwind, there was a group at MIT, which is the Geophysics Analysis Group, and what they were using Whirlwind for was analyzing geophysical data, very much online, offline, very much non-real time. And of course, the reason that you could do very interesting things in non-real time with geophysical data is that very expensive to accumulate the data, and analyzing it to, for example, for oil exploration or seismic activity analysis and things like that, did not require real-time processing for the most part. So, as I said, there was TX0 and then TX2, and so this is a module that represents two flip-flops from TX2. And this is also very, very sophisticated technology. And if you look at these little cases, I don't know if you can see this laser pointer, but if you look at these little cases, each one of those is a transistor, which of course was significantly smaller than a vacuum tube. And that was the technology at the time. Now, I want to just digress for maybe a minute or two and kind of tell you an anecdote that several years ago, I was giving a talk in Greece. And I had this slide up. I was talking about Whirlwind and TX2. And as I had this slide on the screen, I got a phone call from a friend in Boston. And of course, I was in Greece. And my phone didn't ring except in my hearing aids. And so the caller in the States was talking into their iPhone. That went to my iPhone. From my iPhone through Bluetooth, it went into my hearing aids. And I could actually have a conversation. Now, because the problem with that is I forgot to turn off my phone. Now, imagine back in the era of Elvis Presley, if somebody, me or anyone else, had said somebody could call from the States to Greece and you could carry on the phone conversation through your hearing aids, that would have put you in the loony bin. It would be so inconceivable, I guess, like the Dick Tracy watch was so inconceivable. Well, an interesting thing is, to me, is the iPhone now has about 15 billion, with a B, 15 billion transistors in it. Now, imagine the concept of putting 15 billion vacuum tubes into a device that you could make phone calls with. So this just kind of underscores for me how much and how fast the technology has moved since the early days of DSP, and suggests how it's going to continue to accelerate. So back to the 50s, and the origin, I want to really focus in the talk on the origins for me of DSP and kind of my journey with it as the years went by. So this is a slide I kind of like because I can use it for all kinds of purposes. And the purpose right now is to sort of make the point that in the 50s and 60s, we were kind of at a magical time. There was the availability of computers that was accelerating. There was the speed of computers and cost of computers that was moving down. And you could say that this was just kind of a special time. And as has often been remarked to me, people have said to me, Alan, you just happen to be at the right place at the right time. And I'll comment further about that shortly, but I now want to focus the talk in on the place, the people, and my journey from the 50s and 60s to where we are now. So first of all, the places for me were MIT, the MIT campus, which you can see here, and my virtual background on my slides has me sitting right about over here. And then also my years, as I'll mention in a minute, at MIT Lincoln Laboratory, which is about 20 miles from the MIT campus, and very much a research laboratory. And also very significant for me were the people that mentored me and that I collaborated with starting from the 50s, and some of them continuing on even to today. So among those, Amar Bose, Tom Stockham, Ben Gold, Charlie Rader, Ron Schaefer, of course, many others that I interacted with from academia and industry. But as we move through this talk, I in particular want to focus on several of these people. And so in addition to the people, there was my timeline. And my timeline through DSP kind of began as I was completing my doctoral thesis. My doctoral thesis advisor was Amar Bose, and I'm sure that all of you are familiar at least with Bose as the founder of Bose Corporation. And he was my doctoral advisor, and Tom Stockham was on my committee. And shortly after I completed my doctoral thesis, I joined the MIT faculty and started working on deconvolution of speech as an application of my doctoral thesis. And all of that was in very close collaboration with Tom Stockham. Now, for me, there were some incredibly fortunate elements of good luck. So one of them had to do with from Nebraska, named Ron Schaefer, who had just MIT, and he was kind of wandering around, looking at doctoral thesis, and Tom Stockham had connected with Ron, and Ron joined my research group as my first doctoral student. And also in that era, Ben Gold was a visiting scientist at MIT. He was a staff member at Lincoln Laboratory. And Ben, along with Tom Stockham and Amar Bose, were probably my most important mentors throughout my my time at MIT and really throughout my career. Now, an interesting thing happened to me around 1967, which is that my department chairman had a conversation with me, telling me that what I was working on in signal processing and using computers to do signal processing was an unlikely path to tenure. So what I decided to do in 67 was to take a leave of absence from MIT, still on the faculty, but leave of absence, to work with Ben Gold, with Charlie Rader, and with Stockham at Lincoln Laboratory. Now, Ben, Charlie, and Tom were deep into using computers to do signal processing. I'll say a little more about that in a few minutes. But to do signal processing mainly totally for offline processing with an eye toward eventually implementing systems with analog hardware, not with digital hardware. But that was a very magical time in the mid 60s for me, in that at Lincoln Laboratory there were the resources, and there were people like Ben and Charlie and Tom who were all visionaries in digital signal processing. And my view of my time there was really captured in this cartoon. We were all just really having an incredible amount of fun. And of course, we did realize that we were sort of doing research, but the research that we were doing, it was a bit hard to imagine at the time, since it took very large computers to do any of the algorithms that we were working on. It was very hard to imagine at the time that it would ever really become very practical. Well, as I was finishing my leave of absence in 69, the notion of digital signal processing was just starting to take hold. I returned to MIT. I started the DSP course at MIT, wrote detailed lecture notes. Ron Schaefer he had gone to Bell Laboratories, and I invited him to join me as a co-author as we developed the course notes into our first book on DSP that was published in the early 70s. So I would now like to focus in a bit more on several of the people who I've mentioned earlier and who were in every respect real pioneers in the field of digital signal processing. The first that I want to mention is Tom Stockham, and I'd just like to ask the question to the audience of raise your hand if you know who Tom Stockham was. How many hands did you see in the audience on our 2, 10? 2 hands. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know, let me say that Tom Stockham was a truly creative, amazing visionary in the field of digital signal processing, and in particular using digital signal processing for digital audio. Tom, and here's a picture of the TX2. I don't think that's Tom, but you can notice, for example, paper tape. That was quite a revolutionary thing at the time. But Tom was working with Amar Bose on simulating room acoustics and also trying to enhance old vinyl, well, they weren't old, current vinyl records and old recordings. And one of his signature accomplishments in doing that was to restore old Caruso recordings. And that was so successful that RCA actually reproduced or remarketed several albums of Caruso's singing that were digitally enhanced by Tom, and of course done offline. And one of the fun things that Tom did was to actually remove the orchestra from some Caruso recordings with the idea of then dubbing in a new orchestra. RCA never did that part of it, but that was very, very dramatic and very innovative. Now, let me just say before I move on that one of the things that I like about this particular slide is, you know, if you look at this picture of Tom and you look at this picture of Caruso, there's a kind of a resemblance that you can see. And it sort of jokingly makes me think of the line that you have to be careful about the problems that you choose to work on, because at some point you may begin looking like them. Now, Tom is really well known, and it always surprises me in talking about Tom that when I ask in an audience how many of you know who Tom Stockham was, there are very few people that seem to be able to recall him. But Tom is literally widely acknowledged as the father of digital audio. The father of digital audio. And he got an Emmy, a Grammy, an Oscar for his pioneering work. And when you listen to digital audio on whatever device you listen on, there's a little bit or a lot of Tom Stockham that's in everything that you're listening to. Now, I'd like to move on to another one of the pioneers of digital signal processing and another one of my principal mentors. And one of the things I really like about this picture of Ben is it somehow has captured the warmth and charm of my friend Ben Gold. And there's something about his smile, the twinkle in his eye that conveys the really special person that he was. Now, what Ben was working on at Lincoln was speech compression, and in particular analog channel vocoders. And he was working on these vocoders along with Charlie Rader. And these were analog. They had transistors in them. They had inductors that were hand-wound inductors. And one of the issues with analog channel vocoders is the way the basic principle on which they work was the implementation of a filter bank. And the quality of the reconstructed speech was very dependent on the fine-tuning of the components in the filter bank. And so Ben and Charlie and others had the idea of simulating it on a computer, digital computer, and that allowed fine-tuning the parameters, and then, of course, it would eventually be implemented in analog hardware. And so Ben was doing this along with Charlie Rader at Lincoln Laboratory, and obviously very much non-real time. The implementations were very much non-real time. And one of the things Ben and Charlie decided to do was build, I can jokingly call this an embedded real-time DSP chip to do simulation of sophisticated DSP signal processing algorithms at audio rates. Now, I use the word embedded kind of jokingly because you can see that this processor is embedded in a room, but it certainly is not embedded on a printed circuit board. And you can see on the right here the amount of power that was required, 2.5 kilowatts to run it. So it was strictly for purposes of simulation. Now, so that's what DSP was kind of like at the time, non-real time or real time with massive accelerators like the FDP. And Tom Barnwell, who was at Georgia Tech and was also one of the early pioneers of signal processing, kind of tongue-in-cheek, had a description of DSP that was posted on his office door at Georgia Tech, and it went something like this: that DSP is a discipline that allows us to replace a simple resistor and capacitor with two anti-aliasing filters, an E&D to A converter, and a general-purpose computer or array processor like the FDP, as long as the signal we are interested in doesn't vary too quickly. Obviously, very, very impractical. And that was very much the view at the time, certainly in the 50s and 60s, and even into the early 70s. Now, in the 60s, then, there were some, what I refer to as big bangs in DSP that really changed the landscape. Probably the one that would first come to mind for anybody is this paper, which is the paper by Cooley and Tukey in the mid-60s, which is really the outgrowth of a side conversation at a small meeting that Dick Garwin was at, who he just happened to make the off comment about at IBM. They were doing some harmonic analysis, and they wish they could find a faster algorithm to do it. John Tukey happened to be at one of the participants in a meeting. He said, well, you should take a look at a paper by I.J. Good. And Tukey then, Garwin then went back to IBM, checked out the paper, found a programmer named Jim Cooley and said, maybe program this up. And that led to this famous paper by Cooley and Tukey. Now, Jim Cooley likes to tell the story. So back in those days, when you published a paper, you also could order reprints in case anybody requested a reprint. And Jim liked to comment that he ordered the minimum number of reprints because he really didn't think anybody would be interested in it. Or as captured kind of in this cartoon, well, it's well and good that this algorithm is a bit faster, but is there any real practical application for it? Well, that's history, of course. We all know where that led to, and we also all know where the wheel led to. And now let me ask another question to the audience. How many of you know what this flow graph is about? Honor, what? Okay, very interesting. Because the Cooley-Tukey paper was very hard to read. The paper up by I.J. Good had to do with factoring matrices of particular type, Teplis matrices. And very hard to sort of see how you would program that. And this picture is Tom Stockham on the left, Charlie Rader on the right, and their decoding of the Cooley-Tukey algorithm into this flow graph. And then for several decades, it was this flow graph that was the key to both teaching the Cooley-Tukey algorithm and programming the Cooley-Tukey algorithm. And anybody who has learned about the Cooley-Tukey algorithm quite likely would have seen this flow graph. Now, this leads me to another point, which I'm eager to stress. All of my students, all of my friends, most of the audiences that I've ever given a talk to have heard me in one form or another make the comment that nothing is new. And I often make that comment when a student will come rushing into my office and say, and announce, I just came up with a new algorithm, or I just came up with a new theorem, or I just came up with a new something. And my typical response to that is nothing's new. And that notion is very much captured in this paper by Don Johnson, Sid Burris, and Mike Heinemann, in which they researched the history of the FFT, and very specifically, its origin is well before the Cooley-Tukey paper, at least as far back as Gauss, and quite likely even further back than Gauss. So very often when a student will say something like, I just came up with a new X algorithm or theory or whatever, I always encourage them to dig further to see whether they can uncover the origins of something similar to that. Okay, so I've been talking about a few big bangs. Well, with the, let me just say that in the late 60s, Ben Gold and Charlie Rader published a book which had a major impact, and I would categorize as part of the Big Bang to make the basic principles of digital signal processing available in the textbook so that courses could begin to evolve. Now, besides the FFT, there have been lots of algorithms that have contributed to make a difference in how we do signal processing. But to kind of finish my point about the big bangs, I often like to refer to the speak and spell as another example of an entry into the Big Bang in digital signal processing. So I can ask the question again. How many in the audience know what the speak and spell was? Okay, right. Well, of course, speak and spell was a toy, and the origins of the speak and spell actually were that, as I understand it, Texas Instruments was starting to work on DSP processors, and but there was sort of a gap in getting things going and the development process. And in the meantime, some very creative, inventive people at Texas Instruments saw the opportunity to do speech synthesis in a single chip. And this is the speech synthesis chip. And what they did was analyze speech using the Levinson recursion, which I'm guessing everybody in the audience has heard of, and then do the speech synthesis using a lattice network. And the feeling was that there was potentially such a broad market for things like speech synthesis using a chip that it would be well worth the investment. And that turned out to be the case. And it really, the Speak and Spell as a device that puts speech into a consumer commercial product was what I consider to be part of the Big Bang in the emergence of digital signal processing. So now I want to return to this slide. And again, I'm eager to return to it because I like this slide and can use it in so many different contexts. But I now want to focus on where we are now. And so the time that I'm referring to here is the present. And I would like to claim that 2025 is a very special and very magical time in signal processing. And because a lot of things are coming together, and there is an incredible future ahead in our field. Now, when I think about trying to say anything about the future, I'm always reminded of this famous saying by Isaac Asimov, which is the secret to being a successful prophet is to not try to predict anything that's supposed to happen in your own lifetime. And predicting the future is always a difficult thing to do. However, it seems like, to me, and I'm guessing everybody in the audience, that the role and importance of signal processing is growing and expanding in all kinds of ways, not just communication, but entertainment, healthcare, smart cars and highways, space exploration, all kinds of autonomous vehicles. And all of these really depend on sophisticated signal acquisition, signal processing, and interpretation. Now, signal processing really has never existed in a vacuum. It's always been in partnership with other kinds of technologies, sensing technologies, implementation technologies, application technologies. And some of the technologies that signal processing currently partners with is, of course, machine learning, data science. And data science, when I say data science, it includes AI, it includes large language models. And in putting this slide together, my first attempt was to try to draw a Venn diagram. And when I tried to draw a Venn diagram, it was so hard to tell where the overlap existed. But one of the things that's clear is that signal process, machine learning, data science, large language models, AI, all have a signal processing component. And they always will have. So when I think about the future of signal processing, I always return to my favorite statement, which is that there will always be signals, they will always need processing, and there will always be new mathematics and technology to implement the processing. So the field of signal processing is not about to be subsumed by either machine learning or AI or data science. We will always be an integral part of wherever all that goes. And so, as I've said before, we are now at a magical point, 2025, and the future of signal processing, whether it's digital, analog, combination of digital analog, is just beginning, in my view. So it was commented to me many, many times, as I said, that I just happen to be at the right time, the right place, with the right people. And my response to that has always been, all of us are always exactly at the right place at the right time or with the right people. That's where we are right now. And so the future for signal processing, in my view, is very, very bright. So in the words of Dr. Seuss, we're off to great places. Today is our day, and let's get on with it. And with that, I'd like to say thank you very much for attending the talk and for the invitation to be here. And now I'm sure there's time for some Q&A. So did just very, very briefly, and one of the whirlwind computer. I mean, there is a lot of offline processing that with computers that was being done. My focus was much more in this narrow historical perspective on what was going on at MIT and in my experience. So I mentioned Sven Freitel and Anders Robinson, who ran the geophysical signal analysis group, and of course all the oil exploration companies were using basic notions like predictive deconvolution to do offline processing of geophysical data. I don't know if that answers the question, but I would say I didn't include it because that's not where I had specific hands-on experience.
Thank you very much for the very interesting, inspiring talk, and thank you very much for sharing the history with us. I think we have all had the opportunity to have the stressful exam nights of reading your books, so it was very interesting to hear the story behind those textbooks for us from the author. So I'm Mona Gassemian from Huawei, and I have a question about the timing that you mentioned. Particularly, you mentioned right time, right place, and right people. And I'm curious to know why 2025, in your view, is the right time for the influence of signal processing in emerging technology. Why not 2030? Thank you.
The real point of that slide is every time is a very special time. In other words, I think the thing to take away from for my comment is that whether it was last year, this year, next year, every day, there are emerging real new opportunities in signal processing. I'm not sure that. Yeah, let me say what's kind of literally going through my mind right now. So what's going through my mind right now is a podcast that I heard, the title of which was Quantum Birds. And the notion of quantum birds is a theory that says quantum entanglement is what is going on in the eye cells of birds that enables them to navigate using the magnetic field. Now, what that means, of course, is in the eye cells of birds, there is a kind of signal processing that's going on that we don't understand at all. And we're not going to understand it in 2025. Maybe in 2035, we might understand it. So my point is that there are continually new technologies that are emerging. There are new, if we just consider large language models and whether there's a notion of large language models in designing signal processing algorithms. So whenever there is technology advancing, there are new opportunities in signal processing. So that's my honest belief. And it says that every day is a very special day in the future of signal processing. So let me go to your first question first. So your first question, it's an issue that is of real concern in the following sense. What I find at T and more broadly in working with your students is it looks patience for learning fundamentals. There's a much more emphasis on, for example, programming. Let me just simulate it. Let me do some code rather than understanding the basic principles and the math. And what I've found often when I'm at conferences and there are postdocs and people actually doing signal processing is they will typically say that, very often they would say that they now understand that they need to learn what the basic fundamental material is. So the problem is that there's much more of a tendency now for students to be impatient and wanting to just kind of use MATLAB or somehow write something in Python. And then they develop a lot of bad signal processing habits, which then they have to unlearn when they really get involved in doing signal processing. So that's my answer to your first question. My answer to your second question, I don't know I don't have a good answer to, in that there's the question of if you're writing a textbook, how would you incorporate the accessibility of something like ChatGPT or some similar kind of platform? I would say my best guess about that is that that would not be the textbook. So the question is, how do you teach fundamental material, not with a static textbook, but with incorporating something, some AI-based platform that provides the kind of tutoring as you're trying to learn the material. So the tutor won't be the textbook, the tutor will be a sophisticated program. But then the question becomes, what is the motivation for people to develop that platform? I think a little shorter version of my answer to that is textbooks are much too static in the future.
Thank you very much. My name is Doğa Gürgünoğlu from Aselsan. So, as a scholar who grew up with your textbook, especially in signals and systems, I took that course when I was transitioning from my second to third year during my bachelor years. So I have seen multiple approaches about how one does teach signal processing to an undergraduate students. So, for the majority, I would say like two methods were prominent. Like one of them was to start with the frequency domain right off the bat, and then delve into the time domain techniques because of the relative complexity of convolution versus basic multiplication. And the other one was just starting from the concept of a linear time invariant system, like starting from the time domain techniques like the convolution, and then introducing Fourier series and then the Fourier transform, and then so on. So I was wondering about your opinion on which approach would be more favorable in your opinion. I mean, I'm already biased because I was taught with only one of them, but I'm really interested in hearing your thoughts about this.
So I'm aware of the fact that there's multiple viewpoints about this, and that there are, but yeah, let me kind of compact my answer. Even when you're doing digital processing, behind the signal that you're processing almost always is an analog signal. And so my viewpoint is signals, the independent variable on signals is typically continuous. And most of the signals that we're processing kind of begin with a continuous variable, whether it's time or space. It can even be from there. And so my viewpoint is, so first, if it's just one-dimensional, understand fundamental in the time. And then going to the frequency domain, and particularly if the processing that you're going to be doing is LTI processing, because then you can use convolution. A question that I have often asked people when they say that they're doing signal processing is, the question I often like to ask is, what is the Fourier transform? And why is it so important? And I often don't like the answer that I get. Sometimes, quite often, the answer I get is, well, it's the integral from minus infinity to plus infinity, or blah, 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 blah. Understanding why the Fourier transform is so useful for certain types of problems is a really important thing to understand, and why it's not particularly useful for lots of other kinds of problems. For example, the Fourier transform is much less useful if you're talking about processing linear systems that are time varying. Or if you're talking about processing with nonlinear systems, which incidentally neural nets are. I'm not sure that my answer came through, but I think that signal processing should be taught fundamentally, initially in the time domain, and with time being a continuous variable. Oh, looks very nice. I can't see it in detail because, let's see, I should, let's see if I can, no, I can't control this. But I can stop sharing. And thanks again for giving me the opportunity to do that. Bye.